Hello everyone, so this is going to be another one of my The Man in the High Castle videos and a John Smith theory, a theory that is a product of the lingering question as to what happens to be his motivation, which in turn was a product of some of the major events involving his character on the second season of the show. At the end of this video I'll also be discussing a couple of things I'd love to see on the upcoming third season of the show, as well as why I believe that while Italy happens to be an Axis power in World War II, it seems like it will never have any kind of presence on the show as a major power. That seems to have been a question on many fan forums after the release of both Season 1 and Season 2, and I guess we got our answer on whether Italy has a role or not in all of this. So I was kind of going through some of the comments on my previous The Man in the High Castle videos a few days back, and I decided to go back and check some of the show's episodes, and it kind of hit me. What if we got it all wrong? What if we got it all backwards? What if we misperceived John Smith? Basically, when you look at some of his prominent scenes on the second season of the show, it seems we might have partially misunderstood the character. Maybe he's not a Nazi after all, not saying he's resistance either, but maybe, just maybe, he doesn't believe in Nazism the way we have come to believe he does. There are so many incidents and scenes, especially on the second season of the show, to support the possibility that he's not who we think he is. And all the confirmation we have to him being a Nazi is the fact that he seems and sounds like he happens to be one. Nothing but mere appearances, rather than a supporting origin story indicating how he was transformed into the big bad wolf we believe he is. Now I know one of the first comments I'm going to be getting on this video will happen to state how all it takes to be a Nazi is to sound like one. So if it doesn't seem to be obvious here that what I mean is he might be putting up an act, then I'm making it clear right here, right now, just to save you the trip to the comment section where you might be tempted to call me an idiot. But moving forward, and the most important question here, what do we have to support the theory that he might not be a Nazi? Here's a quick list of a few incidents from the second season that might support such a theory. Number 1. We know John Smith used to be a US intelligence officer. We know he didn't defect before the actual victory of the Nazis. He was still a soldier in that cabin with his pregnant wife the day the A-bomb hit Washington DC. We also happen to know that he has that medal sitting in his office, the one that Kido comments on the 5th or maybe the 6th episode of the second season, the one he got for his efforts in the Solomon Islands campaign. He does give a reason as to why he keeps it in his office, and it kinda sounds solid, but I still can't shake that feeling that he had this sorrow to his tone and to that expression on his face as he responded to Kido. He as well makes sure that particular visit of Kido's is erased from the logs in an attempt to ensure no one ever finds out it took place. But moving on to number 2. There are different accounts as to how the Nazi belief system was instilled into the Germans during the period of World War II in Nazi Germany, but it seems that the majority of accounts agree that it was acceptable to see those around you, those you're supposed to care about, taken and their lives ended for being lesser beings, for being defective. An integral part of the belief system ended up with people wishing not to see those who reminded them of weakness, those who did not aspire to their master race concept. For someone who's supposedly a Nazi, Smith did not care much for the concept. He even went the extra mile, killing Dr. Adler to ensure his son's secret dies with him. But moving on to number 3. On the second season finale, Smith makes it clear to Eric that he's not going to bomb one of his cities, as he discusses the idea of leveling Savannah, Georgia to make an example out of the resistance in it. And he actually happens to refer to it as one of his cities. That could be in reference to the fact that it is one of the cities he's overseeing, or a reference to it being an American city. But moving on to number 4. John Smith doesn't seem all that willing to bomb the Japanese in a similar manner to his rejection of the bombing of Savannah. He could be supportive of the growth of the German Empire, maybe even play a greater role in an even greater Nazi Reich, but he still chooses otherwise. But moving on to number 5. You can tell by the people that John surrounds himself with that he does not select people loyal to the Nazi cause, but rather loyal to him. It seems Eric happens to be one of them. The soldier in the surveillance room watching Juliana ended up contacting him with regards to the visit paid to her by Thomas, and there happens to be countless moments in which they seem to be more loyal to him than anything or anyone else. Now if you take a moment to think about it, for someone who's such a Nazi, John Smith is not really inspiring or requiring Nazi loyalty among his men, but rather personal loyalty, or maybe even loyalty to something else. So to sum all of this up, John Smith used to be a US Army intelligence officer who was loyal to his country to the very end, witnessed the bombing of Washington DC while on leave, and ended up somehow becoming the Nazi strongman in the greater Nazi Reich. However, we have no background story to the character explaining how he ended up being that man. He does tend to express a great belief in the Nazi ideology, an integral part of which is the belief in the master race, yet decides to kill Dr. Adler to save his defective son. He does as well express his unwillingness to bomb one of his own cities, even if to get rid of the resistance once and for all, and as well does all he can to stop the possible bombing of San Francisco and the Japanese with it. Now all these facts and incidents combined together raise a couple of questions. What if John Smith became a Nazi for the sole purpose of self and family preservation? What if he did it because he believed it was the only way he could preserve whatever remained of his now split country, occupied by the two forces that won the war? Even better, what if he did it for both? Now a very good argument against the possibility of him wanting to preserve whatever remained of his homeland comes in the form of a question: why wouldn't he join up with the resistance instead? Now that question has a very simple answer. What if he was a realist and his own realism led him to believe resisting would be pretty much fighting for a lost cause, that resisting one or both powers that remained in the world that have got the best weapons to their names would be actually stupid and unfruitful? And what if with this realization he came to decide his best course of action was to be one of them, or at least act like he's one of them, like he was basically kind of working within the confinements of the situation he found himself presented with? Now it is true he would have to end up killing some of his very own people, and it is true he would have to abide by the Nazis' rules, but maybe, just maybe, he thought it was the only way to protect the majority in some sort of a lose some but save the rest kind of situation. I mean, if you actually think about it, it kind of works that way at some point. It is the power that he was granted by joining the Nazis that gives him the power to manage to stop the leveling of Savannah and the A-bombing of San Francisco. Smith doesn't really seem to believe in the inferiority of the Japanese like the others seem to, especially in the war room. Even the ones who seem to be against the war seem to be under the spell of such belief, but not Smith. We see him briefly trying to get Kido to not go to the Japanese embassy in the second season finale, as he informs him that if he fails to stop the impending war, being on Japanese soil will not be safe for him. Now one very important thing to consider here, I'm not necessarily saying John Smith is not a Nazi, but I think there were some strong signals to indicate it might be all an act that might have led him to do terrible things, but possibly an act nonetheless. The character has certainly been one of the most well portrayed yet enigmatic characters on the show so far, and he most definitely has got a lot of us sympathizing with him in a whole lot of instances during the second season's run. But in all cases, we really need to see a deeper dive into the life of John Smith prior to the Nazi victory, find out how this transformation from a US intelligence officer to the Nazi officer we know in the show happened. Now that will probably give us a lot more insight and clarity of what his real motives over the past couple of seasons happened to be all about. On the subject of things I would like to see on the third season though, I'd like to see what's been going on with Russia, considering how in the German war room on the second season finale, it seems the map only indicates 3 kinds of zones worldwide: Japanese, German, and neutral. And one of those neutral zones happens to be the area occupied by Russia on the map. That as well happens to be the same reason why I believe Italy has no role in the show, even though it happens to have been an Axis power. Italy on the map happens to be part of Germany's territory. I guess the cake that is the world was too small to be split 4 ways, neutral zones included. Now one other thing I'd be fine with seeing as an alternative to the life of John Smith prior to the Nazi invasion and victory could be an alternate timeline John Smith, more in a timeline like ours, like the one Tagomi keeps visiting. Seeing a present day John Smith on that kind of timeline would give us a clearer insight on the character and what his motives are. Now I was actually expecting to see a version of him on the alternate timeline on the second season, but unfortunately all we got then happened to be Juliana and Tagomi. Not complaining of course about that, that was pretty great, but I just hoped we would see more there. Now when it comes to the third season, the subject of more timelines seems to be a hot topic among the fans. Some are hoping for it and some are just expecting it, I guess. I'm not really sure that would be a good idea, I'm not sure it wouldn't either. But the show is not about the timelines, it is not about seeing one or many of them. It's more about this one timeline in which the Axis powers won World War II as opposed to the Allies winning on our timeline. Everything else serves that purpose. So unless the introduction of such timelines serves the story, I hope they don't do so just because they can, or just to extend the story and stretch it. That could simply ruin an otherwise perfectly good show. Now one last thing here, rumor has it that Frink is not going to be a returning character on the show, that he died with the explosion in the Kempeitai HQ on the penultimate episode of the second season. Now, even though his character was pretty great on the second season and had a whole lot of development throughout, I'm glad they're not using one of those twists that would basically lead to the demise of the show just to keep one of the leads alive. Now, in my opinion, that would have been so bad, even though a lot of people wanted, or at least suspected, they might explain his survival of this incident through his phasing to another reality. However, that as well could pretty much ruin the whole concept of timeline travel on the show, with it being abused to obviously keep a single character on board. But with that being said, let me know in the comments what you think of my John Smith theory. Do you think John Smith could be, in his own way, a different form of resistance to the annihilation of his own people, for example? And as usual, it would be most definitely appreciated if you drop me a like, and of course it would be appreciated as well if you subscribe to see more of my videos as they come online. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.